The artificial sky of Harbor 10 always seemed to glitch right before the night cycle, a subtle flicker of the atmospheric dome that turned the simulated twilight into a bruised purple haze. It was fitting for a place that sat precariously on the razor's edge of the galaxy. Harbor 10 was not quite Earth Alliance territory, and it was certainly not part of the Phelid Empire. It was the scar tissue between them, a neutral station, serving as a spaceport, a border town, and a refugee camp all rolled into one rotating cylinder of metal and regret. Tonight, the air inside the dockside bar tasted of recycled ozone and cheap synthetic malt. It was the eve of the treaty renewal, and the tension was thick enough to choke a thruster. Dr. Will leaned back in the booth, the worn synth leather creaking under his weight. He was a man who wore his exhaustion like a second skin, comfortable and familiar. At 30-something, his face was a map of sharp lines and weary eyes that constantly scanned the exits, a habit left over from a life he tried to pretend was over. "Hold him steady, May," Will said softly, his voice a low rumble. Across the scratched table, an 8-year-old girl with hair like spun copper bit her lip in concentration. May's hands, small but steady, held down the wriggling form of a chroma skink. The lizard-like pet native to the sulfur rocks of the mining colonies had a nasty gash on its flank. "He keeps trying to change color, Dad," May whispered, her eyes wide. "He's scared." "He is just confused," Will corrected, applying a bioseal gel from a small tube he kept in his belt pouch. "He thinks the bar lights are a predator." "There. Done." The creature settled as the analgesic kicked in its scales, shifting from a panicked crimson to a sleepy teal. Will wiped his hands on a rag, watching his daughter. May was the only bright thing in Harbor 10. She was vibrant, impossibly curious, and possessed a terrifying amount of energy for someone living on a station, running on auxiliary power half the time. "You are a wizard, Dad Vet," May grinned, using the nickname the station locals had given him. It was a joke that stuck half dad, half veterinarian, and for those who knew his history, half veteran. "Not a wizard. Just a guy with a medical kit," Will chuckled, taking a sip of his beer. It was lukewarm. "And keep your voice down, or Rick is going to charge us a medical facility fee." Rick, the bartender, who looked like he had been carved out of granite and bad decisions, was currently wiping down the counter on the far side of the room. He gave a nod in their direction, his mechanical eye whirring softly as it zoomed in and out. The bar was filling up. It was a motley collection of humanity and xenospecies. Traders from the core systems were shouting over prices with asteroid miners. A group of Earth Alliance Marines in off-duty fatigues were drinking heavily in a booth, and a few Phelid merchants sat quietly in the shadows, their tall feline ears twitching at every loud noise. "Dad," May poked his arm. "Yeah, kiddo." "If a Phelid gets mad, really mad, and they poof up their fur," May gestured vaguely at the merchants, "does the fur fall off into their drink, like how Mr. Whiskers sheds on the couch?" Will snorted into his beer. "Mr. Whiskers is a cat, May. A regular Earth-domesticated cat. The Phelid are sophisticated humanoid beings capable of interstellar travel. But to answer your question, I assume they use lint rollers just like everyone else." "I bet they cough up hairballs when they argue," May giggled. "Eat your protein stick," Will commanded, though he was smiling. Above the bar, the massive holographic newsfeed crackled. The volume was low, but the captions scrolled in bold, angry red letters. "Treaty renewal imminent. Tensions rise. As Butcher of Cairo arrives for hearing." Will's smile vanished. The glass in his hand suddenly felt fragile. On the screen, grainy footage from 8 years ago played on a loop. It was the Cairo colony. The footage showed the colony as it had been green, thriving alive. Then the sky in the video turned a blinding, horrific white blue. The glass wave. It was a weapon that did not just burn, it unmade. It disrupted molecular bonds on a massive scale, vaporizing organic matter instantly while leaving buildings eerily intact. Will stared at the screen. The sounds of the bar faded into a dull roar. He could smell it again. Not the stale beer of the dockside, but the scent of ozone and cooked meat. He heard the screaming not of soldiers, but of the comms channel dying out voice by voice, until there was only static. He remembered the medical tent dissolving around him, the way the air pressure dropped when the atmosphere ignited. His hand clenched the glass, so hard, his knuckles turned white. A hairline fracture appeared in the cheap tumbler. "Dad!" The voice was small, cutting through the static in his head. Will blinked. The glass wave faded, replaced by the concerned, mismatched eyes of his daughter. One eye was a deep, oceanic blue, the other a flecked gold. "Dad, you are doing the hand thing," May whispered. Will immediately released the glass. He flexed his stiff fingers, forcing a breath into his lungs. "Sorry. Just thinking about the bill." May did not buy it. She was 8, not stupid. She glanced at the screen, saw the destruction, and looked back at him. She knew the word Caro made her father go to a dark place, even if she did not understand why. "Did you know," May said loudly, changing the subject with the grace of a sledgehammer, "that the jump gates work by folding space like a napkin? If you fold it wrong, do you think the ships come out upside down?" Will looked at her, gratitude washing over him. "That is not exactly how physics works, May. But if the navigators are drunk, maybe." He took a long drink, trying to wash the taste of ash out of his mouth. He needed to get them out of here. The atmosphere on the station was turning poisonous. The hearing for the Felid Admiral, accused of ordering the Caro strike, was scheduled for tomorrow. Everyone was on edge. Then, the door to the dockside slid open with a hiss of hydraulics. The change in the room was instantaneous. The low hum of conversation cut off, as if someone had severed the audio cable. Standing in the doorway was a figure cloaked in heavy, travel-stained gray fabric. The hood was pulled up, but it could not hide the silhouette. The figure was tall, moving with a predator's grace that had been dulled by exhaustion. A pair of triangular ears, covered in soft russet fur, twitched beneath the hood. It was a Felid, but not just a merchant or a diplomat. The gray cloak parted slightly as the figure stepped out of the wind, revealing the dull glint of a high-collar uniform beneath. It was stripped of most insignias, but the cut was unmistakable. Imperial Navy. It was her. Will felt his heart slam against his ribs. He did not need the news feed to identify the woman. Every soldier who served in the Caro sector had burned her image into their retinas. Admiral Velma, the Cat Admiral, the Butcher. She looked smaller than the propaganda posters. The posters showed a 10-foot monster with bared fangs and eyes of fire. The woman standing in the doorway looked like she had not slept in a year. Her fur, visible on her hands and face, was unkempt and matted in places. Her golden eyes were not fiery. They were dull, sunken into deep hollows of fatigue. She took a step inside, and the reaction was visceral. A table of human merchants near the door physically recoiled. One of them, a heavy-set man dealing in spare thruster parts, grabbed his datapad and shoved it into his jacket as if she might steal it with her mind. "We don't want trouble," someone muttered, loud enough to be heard. Velma paused. Her ears flattened against her skull, a universal sign of distress or aggression in her species, but right now, it looked more like a flinch. She scanned the room, looking for a single, empty stool. There was an empty spot near a group of Earth Alliance Marines. As she looked toward it, one of the soldiers, a corporal with a buzz cut, deliberately placed his heavy combat boot on the stool. He did not look at her. He just stared straight ahead, his jaw tight. "Seats taken," the corporal said to the air. "Waiting for a friend who didn't burn a colony." A ripple of low, agreeing murmurs went through the bar. Velma stood frozen. She was the highest-ranking naval officer the Felid Empire had produced in a generation, a tactical genius who had outmaneuvered 3 Alliance fleets. Now, she stood in a dive bar on the edge of nowhere, being bullied by a corporal who probably could not even read a star chart. She felt the weight of the room pressing down on her shoulders. It was a physical sensation, heavy and suffocating. The air felt thin. In her mind, the noise started again, the scream of the dying ships, the confusing telemetry data, the moment the glasswave weapon had activated without her authorization. And beneath it all, the phantom cry of a baby. Just leave, a voice in her head whispered. Go back to the containment quarters. Drink the synthetic water. Sleep until the trial. Let them execute you. It would be quieter. She lowered her head, pulling the hood tighter. She turned toward the door, her shoulders slumped in defeat. Dad, May's voice piped up, cutting through the hostile silence. Why is nobody letting the cat lady sit down? Will stiffened. May, hush. Eat your food. But she looks sad, May insisted, her voice climbing in pitch. Look at her ears, Dad. They are all droopy. That means she is sad. Or she has an ear infection. Does she have an ear infection? May, please, Will hissed, trying to make himself invisible. But it was too late. May, possessing the absolute lack of social fear that only a child could have, stood up on her knees on the booth seat. She waved her arm frantically. Hey, you over here. Velma stopped. Her hand was hovering over the door panel. She turned slowly, her golden eyes scanning the dim room until they landed on the corner booth. She saw a human man who looked like he wanted to phase through the wall, and a small human child with bright red hair waving at her like she was a parade float. Velma hesitated. Every instinct told her to run. These were humans. Humans hated her. Humans wanted to skin her and mount her head on a wall. But the thirst in her throat was a burning sandstorm. She had not had a real drink in 3 weeks, only the rationed nutrient paste provided by her jailers. Slowly, dragging her feet as if they were made of lead, she walked toward them. The bar watched in stunned silence. The sound of her boots on the metal floor was a rhythmic thud, thud, thud. She stopped at the edge of their table. Up close, the smell of her was distinct, not dirty but old, like dust and dry static. She looked at Will, then at the empty bench opposite him. Can I drink here? She asked. Her voice was a shock. It was deep, raspy, and heavily accented. It was not the voice of a monster. It was the voice of someone who had been screaming until they had no voice left. Will looked up. For the first time, he looked her full in the face. The lighting in the booth was better than the door. He saw the scar running down her left cheek, hidden partly by fur. He saw the specific geometry of her facial structure, the same face he had studied in the tactical briefings before the Cairo disaster. Target Alpha, Admiral Velma, eliminate on sight. The rage hit him like a physical blow. It started in his gut and surged up his throat, hot and acidic. This was the architect of his nightmare. This was the woman who pushed the button. Because of her, his unit was ash. Because of her, he woke up screaming 3 nights a week. His hand on the table moved. It slid toward the heavy metal steak knife, sitting on his untouched tray of food. His fingers twitched. It would be so easy. A quick thrust. The jugular was right there, exposed above the collar. Justice. Revenge. For the boys. For the nurses. For the silence of Cairo. Well, May asked, looking at her father. Can she, Dad? Will froze. He looked at May. Her eyes were wide, waiting. She did not see a war criminal. She did not see a murderer. She saw a person who needed a chair. If he drove Velma away now, or if he attacked her, what would May see? She would see her father, her dad vet, become the monster. Will's hand released the knife. He clenched his fist under the table, digging his nails into his palm until he broke the skin. The pain centered him. He took a breath. It shuddered in his chest. He looked at Velma. Her eyes met his. In them, he expected to see arrogance or malice. Instead, he saw a mirror. He saw the same dead, hollow look he saw in the bathroom mirror every morning at 0400 hours. This table, Will said, his voice sounding like gravel grinding together, is always open. As long as you know how to sit and drink without throwing the glass at someone's head. Velma blinked. She seemed stunned, as if he had spoken in a language she did not understand. She looked at the seat, then back at him, waiting for the punchline or the trap. "Please sit," May said, patting the bench. "I promise my dad does not bite. Usually." From the bar, Rick cleared his throat loudly. The mechanical whir of his eye was audible. "If the lady is sitting, she is a customer," Rick announced to the silent room. "Anyone got a problem with paying customers, they can settle their tab and get out." The tension did not vanish, but it broke. The Marines grumbled and turned back to their drinks. The merchants whispered frantically. The moment of violence passed, leaving a strange, trembling quiet. Velma sat down. She moved stiffly, favoring her right side. An old injury, Will noted automatically. Hip dysplasia or shrapnel wound. "Whiskey," Velma said to the serving drone that hovered over. "Double, no ice." "Root beer for me," May chirped. "And another beer for Dad. He is nursing like a baby bird." Will stared at Velma. She kept her eyes on the table surface, avoiding his gaze. She pulled her hands inside her sleeves. "Thank you," she muttered. It sounded like the words hurt her teeth. "Don't thank me," Will said coldly. "My daughter invited you. I'm just paying." Velma flinched again, but nodded. "Understood." "So," May leaned forward, her chin in her hands, staring unabashedly at the Admiral. "Are the ears heavy?" Velma looked up startled. "What?" "Your ears," May pointed. "They are big. Do they make your head tired?" A strange expression crossed Velma's face. It was a mix of annoyance and sheer bafflement. "No. They are cartilage and muscle. They are part of my head." "Can you move them one at a time?" May asked. I suppose." Velma's left ear twitched independently, rotating backward toward a noise at the bar. "Whoa," May breathed. "That is cool. Can you hear what that guy over there is saying?" "May," Will warned. "Stop interrogating the—" He paused. He could not bring himself to say Admiral. "The guest." "It is fine," Velma said. Her voice was softer now. She looked at May with a strange intensity. "Yes, child. I can hear him. He is complaining about the price of fuel cells." "My name is May," the girl said brightly. "M-A-E." Velma's hand, resting on the table, jerked. Her claws, sharp and retractable, slid out for a fraction of a second, scratching the metal surface, before she pulled them back. She stared at May, her pupils narrowing into vertical slits. "May," Velma repeated. The word sounded foreign in her mouth, yet tender. "That is a short name." "It is a good name," Will said defensively. "I did not say it wasn't," Velma said. She took the drink the drone offered and downed half of it in one swallow. She shuddered as the alcohol hit her system. "It is a common sound in my language. May. It means morning light in the dialect of the Southern Prides." "See?" May beamed. "I am morning light. Dad says I am morning headache sometimes." "I have never said that," Will lied. "You thought it," May countered. Velma looked between them. The dynamic was alien to her. A human soldier and a human child sitting in a border bar bickering. It was so normal. It was violently normal compared to the hellscape of her last 5 years. "You are a soldier," Velma said, looking at Will. It was a statement, not a question. "Was," Will corrected. "Medic. I fix dogs and lizards now." "A healer," Velma mused. She swirled the amber liquid in her glass. "We had healers on my ship. Good ones." Her face darkened. "They died." "Mine too," Will said. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and sharp. They stared at each other. Two survivors of the same shipwreck, clinging to different pieces of debris. Will saw the haunted look in her eyes and recognized the specific 1,000-yard stare of a commander who had lost everyone. It confused him. The narrative was that she was a butcher, a cold, calculating killer who sacrificed her own people to destroy the enemy. But the woman sitting here looked less like a butcher and more like the meat. "Why are you here?" Will asked. "At this table. Why didn't you leave?" Velma looked at her empty glass. "Because," she whispered, "the silence in my quarters is too loud. And—" She glanced at May, who was busy drawing a smiley face in the condensation on the table. "It has been a long time since a child looked at me without screaming." Will felt a crack in his armor. Just a hairline fracture like the glass in his hand. He hated her. He had to hate her. But he poured a little of his beer into her empty glass. "Don't get used to it," Will grunted. Velma looked at the beer, then at him. A ghost of a smile, bitter and fleeting, touched her lips. "I never get used to anything human. That is how you survive." 2 hours later, the bar was closing. The night before treaty renewal celebrations had moved to the private sectors. Will walked May back to their living quarters in the residential ring of the station. The corridors were quiet, the hum of the life support systems, a constant lullaby. May was half asleep, walking like a zombie, holding on to Will's belt loop. "Dad," she mumbled as they reached their door. "Yeah. The cat lady was nice. She smells like old books." "She smells like wet dog and ozone," Will muttered, keying the door open. He got May into her pajamas and tucked her into the small bunk. She was asleep before her head hit the pillow. Will brushed a strand of red hair off her forehead. She felt warm, safe. He walked out into the small living area. It was sparse. A table, 2 chairs, and a cabinet on the wall. Will unlocked the cabinet. Inside, behind a pane of glass, were his medals, the Purple Heart, the Star of Valor, and a photograph. It was a group shot of the 404th Medical Battalion. 30 men and women smiling, standing in front of the crimson sunset of Cairo Colony. They were all dead, except him. Will stared at their faces. He felt the familiar guilt, the heavy cloak that never really came off. He reached into his pocket and pulled out his data pad. He opened a secure file, one he wasn't supposed to have. It was a dossier. Target profile, Admiral Velma. The photo was 5 years old. She looked fierce, proud, standing on the bridge of a dreadnought. He looked at the face in the photo, then thought of the broken woman in the bar. "I should have killed you," Will whispered to the darkroom. "I promised them I would." His finger hovered over the delete button, but he couldn't press it. He turned the screen off. 5 levels down in the high-security diplomatic guest quarters, Admiral Velma sat on the edge of a pristine, sterile bed. The room was white, blindingly white. It smelled of antiseptic, trying to scrub away the scent of her failure. She had not turned on the lights. She sat in the dark, the taste of cheap human whiskey still on her tongue. It was the first time in years she felt a warmth in her stomach that wasn't rage. She reached into the inner pocket of her tunic, past the hidden cyanide capsule she kept for the worst-case scenario, and pulled out a small, battered holographic projector. It was old tech, scratched and dented. She placed it on the floor and tapped it with a claw. A small beam of blue light flickered up. It resolved into a 3-dimensional image. It was a baby, a felid infant, covered in soft, downy, cream-colored fur. The baby was laughing, batting at a floating toy. The baby had eyes that did not match. One was deep blue. The other was gold. Velma curled her tail around her legs, leaning down, until her forehead almost touched the hologram. Her breath hitched a ragged sound in the silence. "May," she whispered, using the felid pronunciation, a low purr in the back of her throat. She traced the image of the infant's face with a trembling finger. "You would have been 8 years old today," Velma said to the ghost of light. "Just like the little girl in the bar, just like her." She closed her eyes, and a single tear tracked through the fur on her cheek. "I am so sorry I lived," she whispered. "I am so sorry I left you there." Outside the station, the stars burned cold and indifferent, unaware that the 2 greatest scars of the Cairo War had just shared a drink, and neither of them knew that the only thing that could heal them or destroy them was sleeping in a bunk in Sector 4. The passage of time on Harbor 10 was not measured by the rising and setting of a sun, but by the rhythmic thrum of the life support recyclers and the shift changes of the dock workers. Over the next 6 weeks, a strange, fragile geometry began to form in the corner booth of the dockside bar. It was a routine that would have baffled any intelligence officer in the galaxy. At 1900 hours, just as the station lights dimmed to simulate evening, Admiral Velma would walk through the hydraulic doors. She no longer wore the heavy gray cloak that smelled of travel dust. Instead, she wore her dress uniform, though she had stripped it of the ceremonial sash and the heavy medals that usually adorned a felid high commander. She looked less like a conqueror and more like a ghost haunting her own life. She would order a double whiskey, no ice. And then, defying all logic and political sense, she would sit at the table with Dr. Will and May. For the first few nights, the silence between the two adults had been thick enough to stop a plasma bolt. They sat like two statues carved from regret, separated by a table, sticky with spilled sweetener. But May was a force of nature that recognized no borders, no treaties, and certainly no awkward silences. To May, the terrifying butcher of Cairo was simply a large, furry friend who told excellent stories about space. "So," May asked one Tuesday evening, her tongue protruding slightly as she colored on a sheet of synth paper, "if you are in a spaceship and you drop a piece of toast, does it fall on the butter side or the ceiling?" Velma blinked her golden eyes, shifting from the news feed to the child. The Admiral sat with a rigid posture, her back never touching the booth's cushion. "In zero gravity, little one, the toast does not fall. It floats. And if you are not careful, it floats into the ventilation intake and causes a critical overheat in the navigation cluster." "Did that happen?" May gasped. "Once," Velma admitted, a dry rasp entering her voice. "On the Pride of Oman. We lost faster-than-light capabilities for 6 hours because of a bagel." Will snorted into his beer. It was an involuntary sound, a crack in his stoic facade. He looked up, catching Velma's eye. For a second, the tension that constantly radiated from him, the soldier's instinct to assess threats, dissipated. "A bagel," Will repeated. "The mighty Felid Armada brought to its knees by a carb-heavy breakfast item. It was a poppy seed bagel. The seeds got into the cooling intake and jammed the microfans." May giggled, the sound bright and jarring against the low, melancholic hum of the bar. She pushed her drawing across the table. "I drew your ship, but I made it better." Velma looked down at the paper. It was a crude crayon rendering of a Felid dreadnought. The sharp, aggressive lines of the warship were there, but May had added giant cat ears to the bridge tower and whiskers to the prow. "I call it the SS Meow," May declared proudly. Will tensed, waiting for the Admiral to take offense. The Felid took their naval engineering with religious seriousness. To mock a ship was usually grounds for a duel. Velma stared at the drawing for a long time. Her clawed finger traced the oversized ears. "It is aerodynamic," she said softly. "The sensory arrays on the bridge are significantly larger than standard spec. Very tactical." "Exactly," May beamed. "So you can hear the bad guys coming." "Yes," Velma whispered, her voice dropping. "So we can hear them." Will watched her. He had spent the last month watching her. He noticed things that the news feeds missed. He noticed the way her left hand trembled slightly when she lifted her glass. He noticed that she never sat with her back to the door. And he noticed the way she looked at May with a hunger that had nothing to do with food and everything to do with loss. He was a doctor before he was a soldier, and the diagnostic part of his brain could not help but catalog her symptoms. She was in pain. "Shift your weight," Will said suddenly. Velma looked up, startled. "Excuse me." "Your right hip," Will said, gesturing with his bottle. "You are leaning 20 degrees to the left to compensate. It is compressing your sciatic nerve. That is why your leg twitches." Velma stiffened, her ears flattening. "I am fine, human." I am sure you are, Will said, his voice flat. But if you slide that cushion behind your lower back, you will stop grinding the ball joint into the socket. Velma hesitated. She looked at him with suspicion, searching for the insult. Finding none, she slowly reached for the spare cushion on the bench and wedged it behind her back. She shifted. A subtle release of tension washed over her face, her shoulders dropping half an inch. Better, Will asked. Adequate, Velma grunted. She took a long drink. You observe too much. Occupational hazard, Will replied. And you are not sleeping. Your pupils are sluggish. The dilation response is delayed by at least half a second. The lights on this station are too bright, Velma deflected, looking away. It is not the lights, Will said. He leaned forward, keeping his voice low, so May, who was busy coloring a sun purple, would not hear. It is the quiet. It is hardest when the engines stop, isn't it? When there is no mission. That is when they come back. Velma froze. She turned her gaze to him, and for a moment, the barrier between species vanished. They were just two veterans staring into the same abyss. The faces, Velma murmured. They do not leave. No, Will said. They don't. But the whiskey helps them shut up for a few hours. It was a small bridge, built over a river of blood. But it was there. 2 weeks later, the atmosphere on Harbor 10 had shifted from tense to poisonous. The treaty renewal ceremony was only 3 days away. The station was flooding with diplomats, spies, and journalists. The flags of the Earth Alliance and the Phalid Empire hung side by side in the promenade, but they looked like they were ready to strangle each other. That night, the dockside was nearly empty. Most patrons were avoiding the sector where the Cat Admiral drank. Velma was already at the booth when Will and May arrived. She was further into the bottle than usual. Her movements were slightly uncoordinated, and her fur was unkempt, standing up in erratic tufts along her neck. Rough day at the inquiry, Will asked, sliding into his seat. They asked me about the orbital bombardment patterns, Velma slurred slightly. They wanted to know if I enjoyed the geometry of destruction. She laughed, a harsh, barking sound. Geometry. As if war is math. War is math, Will said, signaling Rick for a water. Casualty rates, supply lines, triage probabilities. It is all math. It is just ugly math. May was asleep against Will's side, her breathing even and rhythmic. Will put a protective arm around her. Velma stared at the sleeping child. I did not order it, she said. The words were quiet, dropped into the space between them like a stone into a well. Will froze. What? Caro, Velma said. She did not look at him. She looked at the amber liquid in her glass. The history books, the Alliance propaganda, say I gave the order. Burn them all. That is what the headlines said. Will felt a cold chill slide down his spine. I heard the reports. The glasswave activation codes came from your flagship, your authorization signature. My signature? Velma nodded. Yes, but not my command. She leaned forward, her eyes burning with a desperate need to be believed, if only by this one enemy soldier. The mission was intimidation, Velma whispered. We were to charge the glasswave emitters, a show of force, to force the colony to surrender without bloodshed. I had explicit orders from the Emperor to avoid civilian casualties. We needed the infrastructure intact. Will listened, his heart hammering against his ribs. This contradicted everything he had believed for 5 years. The narrative of the Butcher of Caro was the foundation of his hatred. I gave the order to power up, Velma continued, her voice trembling. Readiness level 3. But then the system locked. My console went red. The countdown started. I tried to override it. I tried to cut the power coupling manually. I screamed at the bridge crew to sever the connection. She looked up at Will, and the agony in her face was raw and terrifying. The weapon fired itself, Will. It fired, and I watched the telemetry. I watched the colony vanish. And then She choked back a sob. Then it widened the aperture. It targeted my own forward cruisers. My own people. It wiped the board clean. Will sat motionless. A memory sharp and jagged slashed through his mind. He was back in the ruins of the Cairo medical tent. The air was burning. He was digging through rubble, his hands bleeding. His comms unit was crackling with static. Stop. Stop the cycle. Override goddess, damn you, cut the link. The voice on the radio. He had heard it. High-pitched, distorted by panic and translation software, but undeniable. He had always assumed it was a human officer screaming at the enemy. But now, hearing Velma's voice, the timbre, the cadence, he realized with a sickening lurch of his stomach. It was her. The voice screaming to stop the massacre had been the enemy, Admiral. I tried to tell the High Council, Velma said, her voice dropping to a defeatist whisper. They silenced me. They needed a scapegoat to explain the loss of the fleet. The humans needed a monster to rally against. So I became the butcher. And the war continued. Will stared at her. The world tilted on its axis. If she was telling the truth, and the raw, bleeding trauma in her eyes told him she was then, the massacre at Cairo, wasn't an act of war. It was a crime scene. And someone else held the smoking gun. Who? Will asked. Who could override a flagship's firing control? I do not know, Velma shook her head. But I intend to find out, even if they execute me on Sunday. The next evening, Velma did not come to the bar. She had a preliminary hearing with the JAG officers. Will sat alone at the booth. May was at a sleepover with the station engineer's daughter, a rare night of freedom for Will, though he felt the phantom limb sensation of not having her nearby. Mind if I join you, Sergeant? The voice was smooth-cultured and distinctly human. Will looked up. Standing by the table was a man who looked like he had been sculpted for a recruitment poster. Silver hair perfectly coiffed, a jawline that could cut glass. The uniform of an Earth Alliance fleet admiral pressed to perfection. Admiral Harlan Drake, the hero of Cairo. The man who had led the counterattack after the glass wave, driving the Felid forces back to the border. It is just Mr. now, Will said, his guard instantly up. He did not stand. Once a Marine, always a Marine, Harlan smiled. It was a smile that didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were cold blue chips of ice. May I? He sat down before Will could answer. He placed a datapad on the table. I have been watching you, Will, Harlan said pleasantly. You have made quite a life for yourself here on the frontier. The dad vet, charming. What do you want? Admiral Will asked. He took a sip of his beer, wishing it was something stronger. I want to help you, Harlan said. I know about your associate, the Felid woman. She is a customer, Will said. It is a free station. Is it? Harlan leaned in. We are days away from a treaty that will define the next century. Peace hangs by a thread. And that thread is justice. The galaxy needs to see Velma pay for what she did. What she did, Will repeated, testing the words. We need your help to ensure the conviction sticks, Harlan said. I know you kept your medical logs from Cairo, the unauthorized ones, the ones that show the aftermath, the suffering. Will felt the datapad in his pocket grow heavy. Those logs are sealed. Open them, Harlan commanded softly. Testify. Show the court the horror she unleashed. Do this and I can offer you something in return. Harlan tapped the table. Citizenship in the core worlds, full pension reinstatement, a house in the quiet zone of Mars, and for the girl, for May, the best schools, a future where she doesn't have to grow up in a retrofitted cargo container. It was a golden ticket. Everything Will had ever worried about May's safety, her future money, vanished with this offer. All he had to do was hand over the logs that would condemn Velma to execution. But Velma's voice echoed in his head. I did not order it. Why do you need my logs? Will asked slowly. You have the telemetry. You have the victory. Because people are soft, Harlan sneered, the mask slipping for a fraction of a second. They look at her and see a broken old cat. They feel pity. I need them to feel rage. I need them to remember that the Felid are animals. Dangerous, unpredictable animals. He looked at Will, his gaze piercing. Don't let that old cat drag you down, Will. And don't let her drag your daughter down. You know mixed species proximity can be misunderstood by social services. It would be a shame if questions were raised about May's environment. It was a threat, veiled in silk, but a threat nonetheless. I will think about it, Will said, his voice steady, though his hands were trembling under the table. Do that. Harlan stood up, smoothing his tunic. Bring the logs to my office in Sector 1 tomorrow. For the good of humanity. For the good of May. He walked away, moving with the confidence of a man who owned the board. Will sat there for a long time. He thought about the house on Mars. He thought about May, safe in a real school. And then he thought about Velma, sitting in this booth, explaining how a bagel stopped a dreadnought making his daughter laugh. He realized then that Harlan Drake terrified him far more than the Butcher of Cairo ever had. While Will was being courted by the devil, Velma was hunting for ghosts. She was in her temporary quarters, but the lights were off. The only illumination came from a holographic interface projected by Sira, her aide. Sira was young, for a Felid officer, her fur sleek and black, her movements quick and sharp. She was loyal to a fault, one of the few who had refused to abandon Velma when the disgrace hit. We are running out of time, Admiral, Sira hissed, her fingers flying over the virtual keyboard. The station security AI Harbor Core is extremely paranoid. If it detects my slice, it will vent this room into space. Keep digging, Velma growled. She was pacing the small room, her tail lashing. The anomaly in the power grid. Show it to me again. Sira expanded a graph. Here, localized power spikes in the tertiary maintenance tunnels, near the jump gate stabilizers. That is not a power surge, Velma narrowed her eyes. That is a priming sequence. It matches the energy signature of a glasswave emitter, Sira whispered, her ears flattening in fear. But that is impossible. The technology is banned. Only the flagships have the emitters, and they are all docked in quarantine. Someone is building a makeshift one, Velma realized. Here, on the station. Who? Search the code, Velma ordered. The activation sequence. Compare it to the Cairo logs. Not the official ones. The ones from my memory core. Velma tapped the port behind her ear. It was painful to access the raw military data directly. It meant reliving the moment of the firing, but she pushed through the migraine. Data streamed from her implant to Sira's console. Sira worked in silence for 10 minutes. Then she gasped. Admiral, look at the syntax. Velma leaned in. The code used to bypass the safety protocols on the station was elegant, brutal, and highly specific. It used a backdoor routing algorithm that disguised the command as a maintenance cycle. I know this handwriting, Velma whispered. It was not Felid coding. It was human. Specifically, it was the coding style used by the Earth Alliance Black Ops Division. She had studied it for years during the war, trying to counter it. Look at the timestamp on the command line, Velma pointed. It is signed with a ghost key. Sira ran a decryption algorithm. The ghost key dissolved, revealing a user ID. Auth Drake. CMD override. Drake, Velma hissed, her claws extended fully, gouging the metal desk. He is here, and he is doing it again. He plans to trigger a glasswave event here, Sira asked, horrified. At the ceremony, it would kill everyone, humans and Felid alike. And he will blame me, Velma realized. Just like Cairo. He will blow up the station, claim I used a hidden device to sabotage the peace, and ride the wave of outrage into a total war of extermination. It was a masterstroke. It was evil, psychotic, and brilliant. We have to warn the station, Sira said, reaching for the comms. No, Velma stopped her. Harbor Corps is under Alliance oversight right now. If we broadcast this, Drake will intercept it. He will know we know. And we have no physical proof, just digital ghosts he can erase. Suddenly, the room turned red. A siren began to wail, a low, mournful sound that vibrated in their bones. Alert! Alert! Unauthorized energy signature detected in Sector 4. He is moving up the timetable, Velma snapped. Sector 4 is the jump gate anchor. Security. Alert. Suspect identified. On the wall screen, Velma's face appeared. It was a photo from her arrival at the spaceport. Wanted Admiral Velma for attempted sabotage of the treaty. He is framing you right now, Sira said, panic rising in her voice. He must have planted your ID on the bomb. Velma stood tall. The exhaustion fell away, replaced by the cold, hard focus of a commander under fire. She grabbed her cloak. Sira wiped the terminal. Get to the ship. Prep for emergency launch. Where are you going? Sira cried. I am going to stop a bomb, Velma growled. And I am going to need a medic. Will was washing dishes when the alert sounded. The news feed in his quarters interrupted the cartoon May was watching. Breaking news. Terrorist plot exposed. Cat Admiral Velma, wanted for attempted destruction of Harbor 10. May dropped her toy. Dad, they are talking about Velma. Why is her picture red? Will stared at the screen. He saw the timeline. He saw the accusations. And then he remembered the look in Harlan Drake's eyes. I need them to feel rage. Harlan wasn't waiting for the trial. He was manufacturing the verdict. Will's comm unit buzzed. It was an encrypted frequency. He hesitated, then answered. Human. Velma's voice came through, distorted by wind or running. Do not speak. Just listen. I did not do this. But I know what is happening. Drake has rigged the jump gate. If he fires the emitter, the vacuum collapse will pull the whole station inside out. Velma, Will, said his voice tight. Security is swarming. They have orders to shoot on sight. I know, she rasped. I am heading to the engineering sublevel. I can dismantle the emitter, but I need access codes to the manual override. The medical override codes. They are the only ones that share the same root access as life support. She was asking him to commit treason. She was asking him to aid a fugitive. Will looked at May. She was looking at him with those mismatched eyes, blue and gold. The same eyes that he had seen in the mirror of his own soul, reflected in the face of the enemy. If Velma was innocent, Harlan was a monster who was about to kill them all. Dad, May whispered. Will made his choice. He grabbed his medical kit. He grabbed the stun baton he kept for unruly animals. May, get your shoes, Will said, his voice calm and deadly. We are going for a walk. To the park. No, Will said, checking the charge on the baton. To the basement. We have to go help a friend. Is it Velma? May asked, shoving her feet into her boots. Yeah, Will said. It is Velma. He opened the door, stepping out into a corridor that was rapidly filling with panic. The war had come to Harbor 10 and, this time, Will wasn't going to follow orders. He was going to follow his gut. And his gut told him the Cat Admiral was the only hero left in the building. The promenade of Harbor 10 had been scrubbed clean of its usual grime. The scuff marks from cargo haulers had been buffed out of the deck plating, and the scent of ozone and stale beer had been replaced by the synthetic aroma of lavender and pine pumped in through the ventilation shafts at maximum capacity. It was the day of the treaty renewal, and the station was trying very hard to look like a place where peace could actually happen. Flags hung from the high rafters of the atrium. The blue and silver of the Earth Alliance alternated with the crimson and gold of the Felid Empire. They hung limp in the recycled air, heavy with the weight of the last 5 years of bloodshed. Dr. Will stood near the back of the crowd, adjusting the strap of his medical kit. He felt naked without his armor, though he was wearing a formal tunic that smelled of mothballs. He had not worn it since the funeral of his unit. Stop fidgeting, Dad, May said, tugging on his hand. She was bouncing on the balls of her feet, dressed in a dress that she had insisted on picking out herself. It was bright yellow and clashed violently with the solemn gray and navy of the military personnel surrounding them. "You look handsome, like a penguin." "Penguins are dignified," Will grumbled, scanning the upper gantries. His eyes were not looking at the decorations. They were looking for sniper nests. "And I am not fidgeting. I am performing a tactical assessment of the exit routes." "You are worried about Velma," May stated matter-of-factly. Will looked down at her. "I am worried about everything, May. It is my job." He touched the small of his back, checking for the third time that the compact trauma pack and the collapsible stun baton were still clipped to his belt, hidden under the tunic. The alert from the previous night had turned out to be a ghost signal, a test run by Harlan, Will suspected, but it had left his nerves frayed. The crowd was a dense sea of bodies. Humans and Felids stood shoulder to shoulder, an uneasy mixture of curiosity and hatred. The air buzzed with low conversation, 1,000 whispers speculating on whether the peace would hold or if the station would be a tomb by midnight. "Ladies and gentlemen, sentients of all systems," a voice boomed from the overhead speakers. "Please welcome the delegation from the Felid Empire." A hush fell over the atrium. The heavy blast doors at the far end of the stage slid open. Admiral Velma walked out. She was breathtaking. Gone was the travel-stained cloak and the slump of depression. She wore the full dress uniform of a high admiral, a high-collared tunic of midnight black, embroidered with gold thread that caught the harsh stage lights. A cape of crimson silk flowed from her shoulders, and her boots were polished to a mirror shine. But it was her face that silenced the room. She held her head high, her golden eyes sweeping across the crowd with a regal, terrifying intensity. The scar on her cheek was not hidden. It was displayed like a medal of endurance. The crowd rippled. A section of human Marines near the front jeered softly, a low rumble of "butcher" and "killer" moving through the ranks. On the other side, a group of Felid merchants bowed their heads, their ears flattening in a gesture of profound respect. "She looks like a queen," May whispered, her eyes wide. She waved her hand frantically above her head. "Velma, Velma." On the stage 70 yards away, Velma's ear twitched. She paused mid-step. Her gaze locked onto the small yellow dot in the sea of gray. For a microsecond, the mask of the Iron Admiral slipped. Her expression softened, and the corner of her mouth lifted in a ghost of a smile. She gave a nearly imperceptible nod. Will felt a lump form in his throat. He hated that he cared. He hated that he was frightened for her. Velma took her place at the podium opposite Admiral Harlan Drake. Harlan looked every inch the hero, smiling, waving, playing to the cameras that hovered like vultures. "Today," Harlan began, his voice smooth as oiled glass, "we mark not just an end to hostilities but a new beginning. A beginning built on trust, on forgiveness." He turned to Velma, his smile not reaching his eyes. "Isn't that right, Admiral?" Velma leaned into her microphone. Her voice was a low growl that vibrated in the chest of everyone present. "Peace is not built on words, Admiral. It is built on the truth. And the truth is a heavy stone to carry." Harlan's smile tightened. At that exact moment, the lights in the atrium flickered. It wasn't a normal power fluctuation. The air pressure in the room dropped sharply, making everyone's ears pop. The synthetic smell of lavender vanished, replaced instantly by the smell of ozone and copper. "Warning," the voice of Harbor Corps, the station AI, cut through the silence. It was not the polite customer service voice. It was the flat, monotone voice of disaster. "Atmospheric breach detected in Sector 9. Structural integrity compromised. Vacuum seal failure imminent." "Sector 9, Will whispered, his blood running cold. "That is the reactor coupling." A scream tore through the crowd. To the left of the stage, in the technical gallery, a sphere of light expanded. It was not an explosion of fire. It was silent. It was a perfect sphere of blinding white-blue light that expanded outward for 20 feet and then collapsed in on itself. Where the machinery and 3 technicians had been there was simply nothing. No debris, no smoke, just a clean spherical void cut out of reality. "Glass wave," a veteran Marine shouted, his voice cracking with terror. "It is a glass wave." Panic detonated. The crowd surged backward, a stampede of thousands of terrified bodies. People were trampled. Sirens began to wail a dissonant shriek that tore at the eardrums. On the stage, Harlan threw himself flat behind the armored podium. But Velma did not move. She stood rigid, her ears swiveling, scanning the noise. She looked down. Directly beneath the signing table, a second light was beginning to glow. A high-pitched whine, barely audible to human ears, but screaming to a Phalid, was building up. It was a second emitter, right on the stage. Velma looked at the crowd. She looked at the stampede. And then she looked at the back of the room, where a man in a penguin suit was trying to shield a little girl in a yellow dress. If the stage emitter fired, the blast radius would take out the first 10 rows. The shockwave would shatter the viewing transparency behind them, venting the entire promenade into space. May would be pulled out into the dark. Velma did not hesitate. She lunged, not away from the bomb, but toward it. She kicked the signing table over, exposing the pulsing device, a crude jury-rigged glasswave emitter strapped to the deck plates. She slammed her hand onto her belt, activating her personal energy shield. It was a combat prototype, designed to deflect plasma bolts, not a weapon of mass destruction. "Get down!" Velma roared, her voice amplified by the dying PA system. She threw her body over the device, curling into a ball, wrapping her cape and her shield around the blinding light. The world turned white. Will tackled May, covering her body with his own as the shockwave hit. It wasn't sound. It was pure force. It felt like a giant hand had slapped the entire station. The floor buckled. The reinforced glass of the observation deck cracked, a spiderweb of fractures, spreading with a sound like gunshots. Debris rained down. Dust choked the air. Will coughed, shaking the plaster from his hair. "May, report." "I am okay," May squeaked from beneath him. "My ears hurt." Will scrambled up. He looked at the stage. It was a ruin. The podium was gone. There was a crater in the deck, plating the edges smooth and glassy, where the metal had been molecularly fused. Lying in the center of the crater was Velma. She was not moving. Her energy shield generator was a melted lump of slag on her belt. Her uniform was shredded. The fur on her back was singed black, and smoke rose from her stillness. "She is dead," Will thought, the realization hitting him like a punch. "She saved us." Then Velma twitched. A low, agonizing groan escaped her lips. She tried to push herself up, her arms trembling violently. "Secure the terrorist!" Harlan's voice rang out. Harlan scrambled up from behind his cover, pointing a shaking finger at the broken form of the Admiral. "She planted it. I saw her." The codes came from her personal console. It was a suicide run. A squad of Earth Alliance Marines, confused and terrified, raised their rifles. They didn't see a hero. They saw the Butcher of Cairo lying in a crater of her own making. "Fire!" a lieutenant shouted. "No!" Will screamed. He didn't think. He didn't calculate. He moved. He vaulted over the barrier separating the crowd from the VIP area. He sprinted across the debris-strewn stage, his medical kit banging against his hip. "Dad!" May cried out, running after him. "Stay back!" Will yelled, but she was already at his heels. The Marines hesitated, seeing a human civilian and a child run into the line of fire. Will slid to his knees beside Velma. It was bad. Her back was a mess of thermal burns and shrapnel wounds. But she was breathing. "Get away from her, citizen," Harlan commanded, stepping forward. He held a pistol in his hand. "She is a war criminal. She just tried to kill us all." Velma looked up. Her face was bloodied, her vision swimming. She saw Harlan towering over her. She saw the gun. Liar, she rasped, blood bubbling on her lips. Execute her, Harlan ordered the Marines, before she detonates another one. If you shoot her, Will shouted, standing up and placing his body between Velma and the rifles, you shoot me, and you shoot the kid. He pulled May in front of him, not as a shield, but as a deterrent. No Marine wanted to shoot an 8-year-old girl on live broadcast. Dr. Will, Harlan, said, his voice dropping to a dangerous chill. You are making a mistake. You are choosing the animal over your own kind. I am choosing the patient, Will snarled. He looked at the Phalid honor guard who were standing frozen, unsure of what to do. Get us out of here, unless you want your Admiral to bleed out on live TV. Sira, Velma's aide, broke rank. She signaled 2 large Phalid guards. They rushed forward, their personal shields flaring to create a wall. Go, Will ordered. He grabbed Velma's arm, hauling her up. She screamed in pain, but found her footing. The maintenance hatch, Will hissed to Sira. Stage left. It leads to the ventilation tunnels. We can lose them there. They moved as a unit, the guards, Sira, Will, supporting Velma, and May, holding onto Velma's good hand. They crashed through the service door just as the first plasma bolts sizzled against the doorframe. Seal it, Will shouted. Sira fused the lock with a laser cutter. They were in the dark, humid bowels of the station. We cannot go to the embassy, Sira panted. They will be waiting. My clinic, Will said. Sector 4. It is off the grid. I have surgical supplies. The journey to the clinic was a blur of pain and terror. They moved through the service corridors, avoiding the main concourse where the sirens were wailing. Inside the small veterinary clinic, Will swept a pile of sedated space hamsters off the metal examination table. Get her up here, Will ordered. They laid Velma face down. The smell of singed fur and burnt ozone filled the small room. May stood in the corner, her hands over her mouth, tears streaming down her face. Will activated the overhead surgical light. Sira, hold her shoulders. This is going to hurt. He grabbed a bottle of biosealant and a pair of sonic scalpels. He worked with the efficiency of a machine. He cut away the ruined uniform. The skin underneath was angry red and blistering with shards of the shield generator embedded in the muscle. I need to remove the shrapnel before I can seal the tissue, Will muttered. I don't have anesthesia strong enough for Phalid physiology. Do it, Velma gritted out her claws, digging deep grooves into the metal table. Will worked for 20 minutes. Every time he pulled a shard of metal from her back, Velma's body spasmed, but she did not scream. She just let out a low, vibrating growl that shook the instruments on the tray. Finally, it was done. Will sprayed a layer of synthetic skin over the wounds and stepped back, wiping sweat and blood from his forehead. You will live, Will said, but you won't be doing any gymnastics for a month. Velma rolled over, slowly sitting up. She looked at Will. Her golden eyes were clear now, fueled by adrenaline and rage. Why? She asked. Why what? Will asked, washing his hands in the sink. Why did you save me? Velma demanded. You hate me. You have hated me since the moment I walked into the bar. I see it in your eyes, human. You look at me and you see Caro. Will stopped scrubbing. He gripped the edge of the sink. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind the cold, hard reality of who was in his room. He turned around. Yes, Will said softly. I see Caro. Because I was there. Velma went still. Sira took a step back, her hand going to her sidearm. I was the chief medical officer for the 404th Battalion. Will said, his voice trembling with 8 years of suppressed fury. I was in the triage tent when the glass wave hit. I watched 300 men and women dissolve. I watched my best friend turn into steam while I was holding his hand. He walked toward the table. I survived because I was in the shielded storage locker looking for morphine. I crawled out into a graveyard. And for 5 years, I have wanted to put a bullet in the brain of the officer who gave the order. Velma stared at him. Then do it, she whispered. I am unarmed. Finish it. I can't, Will yelled, slamming his hand on the table. Because I heard you. The room fell silent. May sniffled in the corner. I heard the comms, Will said, his voice breaking. I was scanning the frequencies for survivors. I heard a Felid voice screaming. Screaming to cut the power. Screaming no. It was you. He looked at her, his eyes red. I wanted you to be the monster. It was easier when you were the monster. But you weren't. You were just another officer watching your people die. Velma looked down at her hands. I tried to stop it, she whispered. The system, it locked me out. It was not a malfunction, Will. It was a remote override. Harlan, Will said. The name tasted like bile. Yes, Velma hissed. Harlan. He did it then, and he did it today. He tried to kill me, kill the peace, and kill... She looked at May. Her voice caught. Kill the innocent. He framed you, Will said. He wants a war. He thinks humanity can only survive if we wipe you out. Then I will give him what he wants, Velma snarled. She slid off the table, ignoring the pain in her back. She grabbed a scalpel from the tray. He wants a monster. I will show him a monster. I will tear his throat out on live transmission. That is suicide. Will grabbed her arm. You can't get close to him. He has a battalion of Marines. I do not care, Velma roared, shoving him back with surprising strength. I have lost everything. My honor. My fleet. My child. And I lost my life, Will shouted back. I lost my name. I am just a dad vet on a rust bucket station because I couldn't go home. I couldn't go back to Earth and be a hero when everyone I knew was dead. They stood chest to chest human, and Felid screaming their trauma at each other in a small, sterile room. It was ugly. It was raw. It was necessary. Stop it! The scream was high and piercing. May ran between them. She shoved Will's stomach and pushed against Velma's leg. Her face was a mask of tears and snot. Stop fighting, May sobbed. You are being stupid, both of you. She looked up at Velma. If you kill the bad man, will you be happy? Will your kitten in heaven be happy? Velma froze. The rage that had been fueling her suddenly turned to ash. She looked down at the child, this small, fragile creature with the mismatched eyes. May, Velma whispered. No, May stomped her foot. Dad says killing makes a hole in you that never fills up. Do you want another hole? You already have holes in your back. The absurdity of the statement, combined with the profound truth of it, broke the tension. Will slumped against the counter, covering his face with his hands. Velma leaned back against the table, the scalpel clattering to the floor. She is right, Will muttered. She is right. Goddess help us, the 8-year-old is the only adult here. Suddenly, the room turned red again. A drone hovered outside the frosted glass of the clinic door. A laser grid scanned the interior. Subjects identified, a mechanical voice announced. Dr. Will, Admiral Velma, surrender immediately. They found us, Sira said, drawing her weapon. Harbor Corps tracks the biosigns, Will realized. We have to move, now. Where? Velma asked. The corridors will be swarming. Will looked at the pile of sedated space hamsters. He looked at the large pneumatic tube in the back wall, marked Bio-Waste, Large Animal Transport. The tubes, Will said. Velma looked at the tube. It was perhaps 3 feet wide. You want us to crawl through a garbage chute? It is not garbage, Will said, opening the hatch. It connects the vet clinics to the cargo docks. It is designed for transporting sedated livestock. It is the only system Harbor Corps doesn't monitor because it smells like manure. I am a High Admiral of the Felid Empire, Velma stated indignantly. You are a fugitive with a burnt butt, Will countered. Get in the tube. He grabbed May and shoved her in first. Keep crawling, honey. Pretend you are a mole. I am a mole, May chirped, her fear momentarily forgotten in the face of an adventure. Will looked at Velma. After you, Your Highness. Velma glared at him, flattened her ears, and climbed into the tube. Will followed, dragging his medkit. Sierra brought up the rear. They crawled for what felt like miles. The tube was dark, cramped, and smelled of antiseptic and animal musk. At one point, they had to squeeze past a confused six-legged goat that had woken up mid-transit. "This is undignified," Velma's voice echoed from ahead. "It is survival," Will grunted, pushing the goat's rear end out of his face. As they crawled, Sierra's datapad beeped. "Admiral," Sierra whispered. "I have something. The localized network in the tube is shielded. I managed to pull the raw data from the glasswave emitter before it detonated." "And?" Velma asked. "The routing code," Sierra said. "It was masked, but the explosion damaged the encryption. The signal didn't come from your console, Admiral. It came from a remote relay. A relay hardwired to the Earth Alliance VIP box." "Harlan," Will said. "We have proof." "It is digital proof," Sierra argued. "He can claim it is faked. We need the physical transmission log from the station's central core." They reached a junction. The tube split in two directions. One went up toward the command deck. The other went down toward the docking bay. Will stopped. "We have to split up." Velma turned in the cramped space to look at him. "What?" "Harlan is at the command deck," Will said. "He is going to try to broadcast his version of the truth to the fleet. If he does that, the war starts." "I will stop him," Velma said, her eyes darkening. "Permanently." "No," Will said. "If you kill him, you prove him right. You become the monster he says you are. You need to get to the docking bay, get to a ship, get away from here." "And you?" Velma asked. "I am going to Juno," Will said. "The station administrator. She is neutral. If I can get her the data Sierra found and get her to pull the core logs, she can broadcast the truth over the station override. She can clear your name." "It is dangerous," Velma said. "Harlan will be watching the core." "I know the vents," Will smiled grimly. "I fixed the rats, remember, I know where they run." He looked at May. "You go with Velma and Sierra." "What?" May and Velma said in unison. "I can't take you into the core, May. It is a war zone. Sierra has a stealth ship at the docks. They can get you out." Will grabbed Velma's shoulder. "Take her, please. Keep her safe. If I don't make it, she has no one." Velma looked at the human hand on her shoulder. She looked at the man who had hated her an hour ago now, entrusting her with the only thing he loved. "I will guard her with my life," Velma vowed. "On my honor as a Felid." "I know you will," Will said. He kissed May on the forehead. "Be good morning light. Don't eat too much candy." "Dad," May started to cry again. "Go." Will pushed them toward the downward tube. He waited until their shuffling sounds faded into the darkness. Then he turned toward the upward tube, toward the command deck, toward the man who had destroyed his past and was trying to burn his future. "Okay, Harlan," Will whispered, clicking his stun baton to full charge. "Let's go see a man about a dog." He began to climb. Outside the tube, the station shuddered. The vacuum was bleeding in. The war had begun. Harbor 10 was no longer a place of commerce or neutrality. It was a dying animal bleeding atmosphere and hope into the cold vacuum. The station had been locked down. Heavy blast doors painted with yellow and black hazard stripes slammed shut across the main concourse, severing the promenade from the residential rings. The air recyclers labored with a wet, grinding cough, struggling to filter out the smoke from the explosion at the treaty ceremony. Every holographic screen on the station, from the massive billboards in the atrium to the personal datapads of the terrified refugees, played the same looped message. It was a narrative of betrayal, carefully crafted and broadcasted at the speed of light to the awaiting fleets. The Butcher strikes again. Admiral Velma breaks truce. Alliance hero Harlan Drake survives assassination attempt. Outside the reinforced viewports, the stars were disappearing. They were being blocked out by the massive silhouettes of warships. The Earth Alliance Third Fleet had jumped in their railguns, charging with a blue menace. Opposite them, the Phalid Imperial Armada decloaked their sleek, predator-shaped hulls, bristling with missile batteries. The silence between them was not peaceful. It was the intake of breath before a scream. Deep in the station's substructure, in the labyrinth of pipes and conduits that ran beneath the engineering deck, Dr. Will wiped grease from his forehead. "We need to move faster," he whispered. May was clinging to his back, her arms wrapped tight around his neck. She was unusually quiet. The explosion, the running, the smell of fear, it had dampened her bright spirit. She buried her face in the rough fabric of his tunic. "Where are we going, Dad?" she mumbled. "To see an old friend," Will said, stepping over a bundle of severed cables. "And to find out why the universe hates us today." They were in the gut, the maintenance levels, where the cleaning drones and the vermin lived. Will knew these tunnels better than anyone. He had spent 5 years crawling through them to treat the pets of the station's underclass, the illegal lizards, the unlicensed monkeys, the creatures that didn't exist on the official manifest. He stopped at a rusted hatch marked water filtration, authorized personnel only. He banged on it with the handle of his stun baton, 3 shorts, 1 long. The hatch hissed open. A woman stood there holding a plasma wrench like a baseball bat. She was tall, with skin the color of polished mahogany, and hair braided with copper wire. "Juno," Will breathed. "Dr. Will," Juno said, her eyes darting to the shadows behind him. "You are the most wanted man in the sector. Harbor Corps has a bounty on your head that could buy a small moon." "I heard," Will said, stepping inside and pulling the hatch shut. "Harlan is generous with other people's money." Juno was the station administrator, technically the highest authority on Harbor 10, but in reality, she was the janitor of a diplomatic mess. She looked tired. Her office, a control room filled with screens monitoring the station's vitals, was chaotic. Red warning lights blinked on every console. "Why are you here, Will?" Juno asked, holstering the wrench. "I can't hide you. The Alliance Marines are tearing the station apart. They are scanning biosignatures." "I don't need a hiding spot," Will said, setting May down on a swivel chair. He handed the child a protein bar from his pocket. "I need access." "Access to what?" "The medical archives," Will said. "And the deep storage war logs. The ones that are supposed to be sealed for 50 years. Juno laughed a dry, humorless sound. "Those are encrypted by the Earth Alliance High Command. Even though I don't have the keys." "No," Will said, his voice hard. "But you have the maintenance backdoors. You owe me Juno." "Remember the Cyberhound, the one with the crushed servo spine?" Juno's face softened. She looked at the metal dog, sleeping in the corner of the room. Will had spent 14 hours rebuilding its nervous system when the official vets had recommended scrap. "You are calling in a debt at the end of the world," Juno sighed. She moved to the main console. "If I do this and Harlan finds out, he will space me." "If you don't do this," Will said, "Harlan spaces everyone." Juno's fingers flew across the holographic interface. "I can get you a read-only ghost signal. 5 minutes. Then the intrusion countermeasures will fry my terminal." "Do it." Will stepped up to the screen. He didn't look for the logs of the current explosion. He went back. He typed in a date that was branded on his soul. Date, August 12th, 2220. Location, Cairo Colony. The screen flickered. Data streamed in green text against a black background. Will bypassed the official combat reports. He went to the raw telemetry data, the automated logs from the orbital satellites that didn't care about politics. "What are you looking for?" Juno asked. "The lie," Will muttered. He found a video file. It was time-stamped 4 hours before the Phalid fleet had arrived at Cairo. The footage was grainy, taken from a weather satellite. It showed the perimeter of the Phalid civilian settlement on Cairo. Shadows were moving. Will magnified the image. They were soldiers, human soldiers. They were wearing stealth armor, the kind that bent light around the wearer. but the satellite's thermal imaging picked them up. They were planting devices around the settlement's power grid, large metallic cylinders. Will froze. He recognized the cylinders. He had seen a smaller version of one just hours ago under the podium. Glasswave emitters. He zoomed in on the shoulder patch of the lead soldier. It was faint, but visible. A black hawk gripping a lightning bolt. "That is not regular army," Juno whispered. "That is Black Ops. Task Force Omega. Harlan's personal death squad," Will said, his voice shaking. The timestamp was the smoking gun. The emitters were planted before Velma's ships even entered the system. The accidental discharge from the Felid flagship hadn't been an accident, and it hadn't come from the ship. The flagship had sent the activation signal, yes, but only because someone had hacked its comms to trigger the devices already planted on the ground. It was a setup, a massacre designed to look like a war crime. "He killed them all," Will whispered. "He planted a bomb in a civilian town, waited for the enemy to show up, and then blew it up to blame them. He sacrificed the human colonists, too. They were just collateral damage to sell the narrative." "Will," Juno said, her voice tight. "Look at the medical recovery logs, the ones from your unit." Will swiped the screen. A list of recovered assets appeared. "Unit 404 Medical. Recovery Report." He scrolled down. He stopped at an entry near the bottom. Log ID 7734B. Officer L.T.W. Sommers. Subject biological asset found in ruins. Status unregistered. Will closed his eyes. The memory hit him with the force of a physical blow. He was back on Cairo. The ash was snowing down. The silence was absolute. He was digging through the wreckage of what used to be a nursery. He wasn't supposed to be there. The retreat order had been given. He had found a stasis pod. It was a Felid design, small, and egg-shaped, scorched by the heat of the glass wave. The shielding had held barely. He had wiped the soot from the viewport. Inside, a baby was crying a silent wail behind the glass. Will remembered his hand hovering over the keypad. Protocol demanded he tag it for the science division. They would take the infant. They would dissect it, study its resistance to the radiation, turn it into a weapon. Instead, he had cracked the seal. He had picked up the warm, furry bundle. There was a label on the pod. Most of it was burned away. Only 3 Felid characters remained legible. "May, I stole her," Will whispered to the screen. He turned to look at May. She was spinning in the chair, oblivious to the fact that her origin story was scrolling on the monitor in cold green text. "I didn't save her," Will said, his voice cracking. "I stole a child from the enemy because I couldn't save my own men. I needed something to keep alive. I was selfish." "You were human," Juno said softly. "No," Will said. "I was a thief. And now the mother is on this station." 5 levels above, in a darkened cargo container, Admiral Velma was staring into her own abyss. Sira had connected Velma's neural implant to the portable interface of their stolen datapad. They were bypassing the safety protocols of the Felid memory cortex. "Admiral," Sira warned, "this is dangerous. Accessing deep storage tactical memories without a medical tank can cause synaptic seizure." "Do it," Velma growled. She was lying on a crate, her body rigid. "I need to see the launch. I need to see the coordinates." The world dissolved into white static. Velma was no longer in a cargo container. She was back on the Pride of Omen 5 years ago, but not on the bridge. She was in her private quarters. The alarms were screaming. The ship was shaking violently as the feedback loop from the glass wave tore through the fleet systems. In the memory, Velma was running. She was holding a bundle in her arms. A baby. Her baby. The child was only 3 weeks old. Eyes of blue and gold. She reached the escape pods. The bay was in chaos. Officers were scrambling. "Get them away." Velma was screaming in the memory. "Launch everything, get the civilians clear." She reached the last pod. It was a prototype, small, designed for high-velocity ejection. She placed the baby inside. Her hands were shaking uncontrollably. She kissed the glass. "Be safe," she whispered. "Be safe, my little storm." She typed in the destination coordinates. In the panic with the navigation computer frying, she couldn't lock onto a friendly system. The Felid space was too far. The Alliance fleet was closing in. If she targeted a specific planet, they would calculate the trajectory and shoot it down. So she did the only thing a tactician could do. She typed in, random vector, signal, civilian salvage. It was a desperate gamble. It meant the pod would drift until anyone picked it up. It relied on the mercy of the universe. As the pod hissed shut, Velma saw the label she had taped to the front. Name Mylia. The blast doors opened. The pod shot out into the chaos of the battle, a tiny speck of white disappearing into the blinding light of the glass wave. The memory ended. Velma gasped, jerking upright on the crate in the real world. She vomited dryly, her body convulsing with the phantom grief. "Admiral," Sira steadied her. Velma looked at Sira. Her golden eyes were wide shattered. "I sent her into the fire," Velma whispered. "I sent her right into the enemy's hands." "Admiral, the pod, it was likely destroyed," Sira said gently. "The debris field." "No," Velma said. She stood up, swaying. "No. The coordinates were random. But the vector, the drift." She looked at the door of the container toward where Will and the girl had gone. "Blue and gold," Velma murmured. "The eyes. The age. The name." "Admiral." "The human doctor." Velma said, her voice trembling. "He didn't just find a child. He found my child." The realization was a physical weight. It crushed the air out of her lungs. She had spent 5 years mourning a ghost. And for the last 2 months, she had been drinking whiskey with that ghost, drawing pictures with her, letting her pull her ears. And the man sitting across from her, the man she had started to respect, was the kidnapper. A roar of pure primal fury built in her chest. He knew. He must have known. He had kept her daughter as a pet, as a trophy. But then, another memory surfaced. Will in the clinic standing between her and the Marines. Will diving over May to protect her from the blast. Will's voice, saying, "I chose the patient." He hadn't treated May like a trophy. He had treated her like a daughter. Velma sank back down onto the crate. The anger clashed with gratitude, creating a storm of emotion that paralyzed her. "He stole her," she whispered, "and he saved her." The reprieve didn't last. The station's speakers crackled to life again. This time, it wasn't a recording. "Dr. William Summers, Admiral Velma." The voice was Harlan Drake. It echoed through every corridor, every vent, every pipe. It was calm, reasonable, and terrifying. "I know you are listening. I know you are in the lower levels. You are trying to find proof. You are trying to rewrite history." Will, in Juno's office, looked up at the ceiling speakers. "But history is written by the victors," Harlan continued. "And today, humanity wins." "He is tracking us," Juno warned her hands, flying over the console. "He is isolating the audio pickups." "Let him," Will said. He grabbed the microphone from Juno's console. "Patch me in. Station-wide." "Will, are you crazy?" "Do it." Juno hesitated, then flipped a switch. "You are live." "Harlan," Will shouted into the mic. "We saw the logs. We saw the Black Ops team on Cairo. We know you planted the emitters. You murdered your own people to start a war." His voice boomed through the station. In the refugee camps, people looked up. In the barracks, Marines paused. Doctor," Harlan's voice came back amused. "You found the footage. Good. I was worried it was too subtle." "You admit it?" Will asked, stunned. "Admit it," Harlan laughed. "I am proud of it. Do you think peace works, Will? Do you think we can coexist with predators who have fangs and claws? The Felid are an existential threat. Cairo was necessary. It was a vaccine. A small dose of death to inoculate humanity against the weakness of empathy." "You are insane," Will said. "And you are a thief," Harlan countered. His voice dropped an octave. Let's talk about the girl Will. Let's talk about May. Will went cold. May stopped spinning in the chair. You think I didn't know, Harlan sneered. I have known for years. A human medic registers a child with unknown DNA. I ran the sequence, Will. I knew exactly who she was. I knew she was the spawn of the failed High Admiral. You stayed away from her, Will roared. I let you keep her, Harlan said. Because she was useful. Leverage. A biological asset I could cash in when the time was right. If you ever stepped out of line, I was going to expose her. Or dissect her. You touch her, Will whispered, and I will kill you. You won't get the chance, Harlan said. Because you are in Sector 4. Specifically the filtration junction. Juno's eyes went wide. He traced the broadcast. Harbor Corps, Harlan commanded. Initiate emergency venting protocols for Sector 4. Containment of hazardous biological material. Command accepted, the AI droned. No, Juno screamed, slamming her hands on the override keys. Access denied. He has locked me out. Sirens began to scream. A red light bathed the room. The heavy blast doors at the end of the corridor slammed shut, sealing them in. Venting in 30 seconds, the AI announced. Dad! May stood up, her lip trembling. My ears are popping. Get to the airlock, Will yelled, grabbing her. Juno, get your mask. The airlock is cycled shut, Juno yelled. We are trapped. The sound of the air pumps reversing was a deafening roar. The pressure dropped instantly. Papers flew off the desk. The air turned cold. Will looked around frantically. There was a breach in the outer hull wall, a small maintenance port used for drones. The shutters were retracting. Through the hole, he could see the stars, and the vacuum was sucking the air out with the force of a hurricane. Hold on! Will screamed, grabbing a pipe with one hand, and May with the other. May's feet lifted off the floor. She screamed, the sound thin and distant in the thinning air. Then something slammed into the room from the ventilation shaft above. A black blur. Velma hit the floor claws, digging into the metal grating. She was wearing a stolen marine chest plate over her bandages. Sira dropped down behind her. The breach, Velma roared, fighting the wind. She saw the open maintenance port. The air was rushing out, pulling everything with it. I can't close it, Juno yelled, holding onto the console. Hydraulics are dead. Velma looked at the hole. It was about 10 inches wide. She looked at May, who was dangling from Will's grip, her legs kicking over the abyss. Velma didn't think. She launched herself. She didn't run away from the vacuum. She ran into it. She threw her body against the open port. The suction was immense. It slammed her against the metal frame with the force of a car crash. Her back, already flayed and burned, took the full impact. Admiral! Sira screamed. Velma roared in agony as the vacuum tried to pull her through the hole. But her armor caught on the edges. She splayed her arms and legs, digging her claws into the seal, turning herself into a living cork. The wind died. The howling stopped. The room fell silent, save for the ragged breathing of the survivors. Velma stayed there, pinned against the void by the pressure differential. Her face was pressed against the cold metal, her teeth bared in a grimace of pure pain. Dad, May whispered. Will dropped to the floor, gasping for air. He looked at the woman plastered against the wall, holding the darkness back with her broken body. Get the manual override, Will wheezed to Sira. Seal the secondary shutter. We have maybe a minute before her bones break. Sira scrambled to the panel, ripping the cover off and hot-wiring the hydraulics. Will ran to Velma. He grabbed her shoulder. Hang on. Just hang on. Velma opened one eye. It was bloodshot. She looked past him directly at May. Is she safe? Velma rasped. She is safe, Will said. You saved her. Again. Seal closing, Sira grunted. A heavy metal shutter slid down, covering the port and Velma. As the pressure equalized, Velma slumped to the floor, sliding down the wall like a broken doll. Will was on her instantly with a hypo spray. "Don't move. You have internal bleeding." May walked forward slowly. Her yellow dress was torn. She looked at the failed Admiral, who was gasping for air on the dirty floor. May reached out a trembling hand and touched the soft fur on Velma's cheek. "Mom." The word hung in the air heavier than the vacuum. May didn't know the biology. She didn't know the history. She just knew that this woman had walked through fire and vacuum for her. And she felt a pull, a magnetic connection that she had never felt with anyone, even Will. Velma froze. She looked at the child. Tears mixed with the blood on her face. "My little Storm," Velma whispered. "We have to go," Juno said, her voice shaking. "Harlan knows he missed. He will send a squad to finish the job." Will looked at Velma, then at May. He saw the connection. He saw the family he had broken and the family that was trying to heal. "We are leaving," Will said. "Sira, where is that ship?" "Docking Bay 94, Sira said. "It is a fast courier, but we have to cross the open deck." "Harbor 10 is dead," Will said, helping Velma stand. She groaned, leaning heavily on him. "There is no justice here. Not anymore." "Where do we go?" May asked, holding Velma's hand. Will looked at the datapad in his pocket, the one with the proof of Harlan's crimes. The proof that could stop a war or start a bigger one. "We go to the fleet," Will said. "We go to the front lines. We shove this truth down Harlan's throat before he can fire the first shot." "He is on the UNS Vengeance," Juno said, checking the sensors. "It is the biggest dreadnought in the sector." "Good," Velma spat, wiping blood from her mouth. "I have destroyed dreadnoughts with less than a bagel." Will supported her on one side, Sira on the other. May walked in front. They moved toward the hangar. Behind them, the station burned. Ahead of them, the galaxy waited on a knife's edge. This was no longer a story about a bar. It was a story about ghosts. And the ghosts were tired of being dead. The stars outside the cockpit of Sira's courier ship were not peaceful. They were cold, distant points of light that didn't care if the galaxy burned. "Target acquired," Sira said, her paws moving deftly over the controls. "Relay station Omicron 9. It is an old listening post from the first expansion war. Abandoned. Dark." Velma leaned forward in the co-pilot seat. She was still wearing the stolen marine chestplate over her bandages, and every breath was a jagged shard of pain in her ribs. But her eyes were focused, burning with a cold, predatory light. "That is where he will do it," Velma said. "The array is powerful enough to broadcast a signal to the core worlds without relay buoys. He wants to bypass the military sensors." "And frame you for good," Dr. Will added from the back, checking the charge on his stun baton. He looked at May, who was curled up in the navigator's chair, hugging her knees. She hadn't spoken since the airlock incident. The silence of space seemed to have seeped into her bones. The ship docked silently at the derelict station. The airlock hissed open, revealing a dark, cavernous hallway, where gravity was a suggestion rather than a rule. Dust motes floated in the weak emergency lighting like suspended snow. "Stay close," Will whispered to May. "Hold my belt." They moved into the station. It was a ghost ship of wires and rusted bulkheads. The silence was absolute, save for the hum of their own gear. "You know," Velma whispered, her voice tight with pain, but laced with a grim humor. "This reminds me of my honeymoon. Dark, cold, and likely to end in violence." Will almost laughed. "You had a strange husband, Admiral." "I was married to the fleet," Velma corrected. "She was a demanding spouse." Suddenly, the speakers in the hallway crackled to life. "Welcome, friends," Harlan Drake's voice boomed, distorted by the ancient acoustics. "I see you followed the breadcrumbs. Or perhaps you just couldn't stay away from the truth." "He is watching us," Sira hissed, scanning for cameras. "Of course I am," Harlan's voice purred. "I want you here. I want witnesses for the finale." The lights in the corridor flickered and died, then flared back on red. Deep, bloody red. "Come to the control deck," Harlan invited. "Bring the child. It is time for a family reunion." They reached the control deck 10 minutes later. It was a massive spherical room, dominated by a central dais, surrounded by banks of ancient monitors. The viewports looked out onto the array, a spiderweb of metal antennas stretching into the void. Harlan stood on the dais. He was wearing an exosuit, a sleek, powered armor skeleton that hummed with hydraulic power. He looked like a god of war made of chrome and arrogance. And he was holding a detonator. But that wasn't what stopped Will's heart. What stopped his heart was the sudden realization that May was gone from his side. In the low gravity, while they had been distracted by a decoy drone in the hallway, Harlan had used a tractor beam. May was now standing on the dais, suspended in a gravity trap. A shimmering field held her in place. Harlan stood behind her, a plasma knife hovering inches from her neck. "Don't move," Harlan said pleasantly, "or the little hybrid loses her head." Will took a step forward, his baton useless at this range. "Let her go, Harlan. This is between us." "Oh, but she is the whole point," Harlan smiled. He tapped a console. A camera drone floated down, focusing on May's terrified face. "Broadcasting in 3 minutes," Harlan announced. "The galaxy needs to see this. The final proof of Phalid savagery." He looked at Velma. "Tell them, Admiral. Tell them whose daughter this is." Velma froze. She looked at May, the mismatched eyes, the copper hair that hid the small pointed ears she had inherited from a father Velma had never mentioned. "She is mine," Velma whispered. The words were barely audible. "Louder," Harlan commanded. "Tell the human doctor who he has been raising." "She is my daughter," Velma roared, the sound tearing from her throat. "Malia of the House of Winter. The child I put in the pod at Cairo." The silence that followed was louder than any explosion. Will felt the blood drain from his face. He looked at May. He looked at Velma. The pieces slammed together with the force of a tectonic shift. The pod. The name. The eyes. "You knew," Will whispered to Harlan. "I knew from the moment you registered her DNA." Harlan laughed. "A Phalid human hybrid. A genetic anomaly. She is rare, Will. And valuable. I let you keep her because you were a convenient babysitter. I knew one day I could use her to break the Admiral." He leaned down, whispering into May's ear, but the microphone picked it up. "Your daddy isn't your daddy, little one. He stole you. He took you from your real mother because he hates her kind. He is a thief." May looked at Will. Her eyes were filled with a confusion so deep it broke his heart. "Dad," Will dropped his baton. It clattered on the metal floor. "Is it true?" May asked, her voice small. Will looked at Velma. He saw the shock on her face, the realization that the man she had been drinking with, the man she had started to trust, was the man who had taken her child. "Yes," Will said. He didn't look away from May. "I found you in the wreckage. I saw the pod. I could have given you back, I could have reported it, but I didn't." He took a breath. "I was lonely, May. I was broken. And you were hope. So I kept you. I was selfish." "See?" Harlan sneered. "A thief. A kidnapper." "And you," Harlan turned to Velma. "You abandoned her. You shot her into space like garbage. What kind of mother does that?" Velma trembled. The grief was a physical weight threatening to crush her. "I tried to save her." "You failed," Harlan said. "And now I will fix the mistake. The galaxy will see a monster killing a child. And then I will kill the monster." Perfect symmetry. He raised the knife. "Wait." It wasn't Will. It wasn't Velma. It was May. She wasn't crying anymore. She stood up straight in the gravity field, her small fists clenched. "You are all stupid," May said. Her voice was clear, ringing through the chamber. She looked at Harlan. You are just a mean old man who likes to break things. She looked at Velma. You didn't throw me away. You saved me. Dad told me about the pod. He said whoever packed it made sure the air scrubbers were full. You packed me a lunch. Velma let out a choked sob. Then May looked at Will. And you didn't steal me. You picked me up. You learned how to make Falid formula. You read me stories. She looked between them. I am not a trophy. I am not a weapon. I am May. And I am the daughter of both of you if you two idiots would stop fighting and help me. The words hit the room like a shockwave. It wasn't political. It wasn't tactical. It was just true. Velma looked at Will. She saw the guilt, yes. But she also saw love. She saw the 5 years of bedtime stories and scraped knees. She saw the man who had stood between her and a vacuum. The hate vanished. It was replaced by something hotter, sharper. She looked at Harlan. You are right, Harlan, Velma said, her voice dropping to a low, dangerous purr. I am a monster, but I am not the kind that eats children. She ignited her claws. Not the energy blades, but her natural bone-white claws. I am the kind that eats tyrants, Velma launched herself. She didn't run. She pounced. A 40-foot leap across the low-gravity chamber. Kill them! Harlan shouted, activating his exosuit's weapons. Will moved. He didn't go for his baton. He went for the environment controls. Sierra gravity fluctuating cycle, Will yelled. Sierra, at the door console, slammed her hand onto the controls. The gravity in the room went crazy. 1 second, it was 0G. The next, it was double Earth standard. Harlan's exosuit was designed for stability. It tried to compensate. But the predictive algorithms couldn't handle the chaotic switching. He stumbled, his plasma shot going wide. Velma hit him. She was a blur of black and silver. Her claws raked across his sensors, blinding his suit. Get off me, animal! Harlan roared, swinging a hydraulic fist. Velma dodged, using the low-G moments to bounce off the walls like a pinball. She was fast-fluid and utterly lethal. Will sprinted for the dais. He slid under the gravity field, grabbing the generator node. He ripped the wires out with his bare hands. The field dropped. May fell. Will caught her. Go hide behind the console! No, May shouted. She grabbed a loose panel cover. I am helping. That is my girl. Will grinned, blood running down his forehead from a piece of debris. Harlan managed to grab Velma. The exosuit's servo clamped onto her leg. There was a sickening crunch. I will break you in half, Harlan screamed. Velma roared in pain, but she didn't pull away. She drove her elbow into the suit's neck joint, the one weak spot she had noticed Will pointing out on the schematic earlier. Will now! Velma shouted. Will didn't hesitate. He grabbed a heavy coolant canister from the floor. He didn't throw it. He calculated the trajectory of the spinning artificial gravity. Physics, Will muttered. It is a bitch. He tossed the canister, just as the gravity spiked to 3 Gs. The canister accelerated like a cannonball. It slammed into the back of Harlan's knee joint. The suit buckled. Harlan fell. Velma tore herself free, rolling away. Harlan tried to rise his suit, sparking. You cannot defeat me. I am the future of humanity. No, May yelled from the console. You are just a glitch. She smashed her panel cover into the broadcast terminal. Sierra the feed, Will shouted. I have it, Sierra yelled. I am redirecting the signal. Instead of Harlan's carefully curated propaganda, the array blasted a new signal. It was the recording from Juno's office. The recording of Harlan admitting to the Cairo massacre. Admitting to the setup. People of the Alliance, citizens of the Empire. Will's voice from the recording boomed through the speakers. Listen to the truth. Harlan froze. He heard his own voice echoing from the void. No, he whispered. It is over, Harlan, Will said, standing over him panting. Everyone knows. Harlan looked at the screen. He saw the fleets pausing. He saw the weapons powering down as the commanders realized they had been played. If I go down, Harlan snarled. "I take the station with me." He reached for the self-destruct on his suit. It was a mini glasswave core, unstable and deadly. "Velma!" Will shouted. Velma didn't need telling. She was already moving, but not to attack. She grabbed the severed gravity generator cable, a live power line, sparking with thousands of volts. "Catch!" Velma yelled, throwing the end to Will. Will caught it. He understood instantly. They ran in opposite directions, wrapping the cable around Harlan's suit. "May, hit the magnet!" Will screamed. May slammed her small hand on the electromagnetic lock button. The floor beneath Harlan magnetized. The cable conducting the charge snapped tight. Harlan was pinned. The magnetic field interfered with the glasswave containment in his suit. "Container breach," the suit's AI announced politely. "Run!" Will grabbed May. Velma limped after them. They dove behind the heavy blast shield of the main console, just as Harlan's suit detonated. It wasn't a big explosion. It was a small contained sphere of white light. A mini glasswave. It ate Harlan. It ate the dais. And then it vanished, leaving a perfect spherical hole in the floor. Silence returned to the station. The aftermath was messy, as all wars are. There were inquiries, tribunals, shouting matches between diplomats. But the war did not restart. The fleets went home. Velma was cleared of treason, but she refused to return to the Admiralty. She said she had seen enough stars die. She accepted a post as the failed ambassador to Harbor 10, the place that had almost killed her, and the place that had saved her. Will kept his clinic. He kept fixing lizards and dogs. But he had a new assistant, a young, failed aide named Sira, who had decided that veterinary medicine was less stressful than black ops. And May went to school. A real school on the station where she got into fights, because she insisted that cats were better than dogs, and then defended her position with surprisingly sound, tactical analysis. 3 months later, the dockside bar had been renovated. The blast marks were painted over, and Rick had installed a new holographic jukebox. It was Tuesday, Taco Tuesday. Will sat in the corner booth, the same booth. He had a beer in front of him. Opposite him was a bowl of warm, nutrient-enriched milk, the kind felids drank when they were trying to gain weight. The door opened. Velma walked in. She wasn't wearing a cloak. She wasn't wearing a uniform. She was wearing a simple civilian tunic of soft blue. She walked with a cane favoring her left leg, but her head was high. Sitting on her shoulder, swinging her legs, was May. "Hey, Dad Vet," May shouted, waving a piece of paper. "I got an A in history. I told the teacher she was wrong about the Battle of Orion, and Mom helped me draw a diagram." Will smiled. It was a real smile, one that reached his eyes and stayed there. Velma walked to the table. She looked at Will. She looked at the milk. She hesitated just for a second. The ghost of the old fear flickered in her eyes. "Can I drink here?" she asked. It was the same question, the same rasp in her voice. Will looked at her. He looked at the scars on her face, the gray in her fur that matched the gray in his beard. He looked at May, who was sliding off Velma's shoulder to squeeze onto the bench between them. He thought about Caro. He thought about the pod. He thought about the vacuum. "You haven't realized it yet, Admiral. This is your home. Me and the kid, we are just guests." Velma stared at him. Her mouth opened slightly, but no words came. She looked around the bar, the noise, the grime, the life. She looked at the man who had stolen her daughter and given her back a family. She sat down. She put her cane aside. She picked up the bowl with both hands. "Then the guests should behave," Velma whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "Or I will have to court-martial them." "Try it," Will challenged, clinking his beer against her bowl. May laughed, a sound bright and clear as a bell. "Cheers." Outside, the station spun on its axis. Ships came and went. Treaties were signed and broken. But in the corner of the dockside bar, the war was finally truly over. Because humanity and felinity wasn't about who shot first. It was about who was brave enough to pour the next drink.